So this next talk is by me, Kory. This is the technology update for iRODS. All right, so as we like to do every year, we want to take a moment and just thank our contributors, the people who have spent time, helping to make iRODS better, whether that's through opening issues, through providing PRs and contributing code changes. It's all helpful and makes everything better. Since last year's UGM, we've had 4 releases, 433, 434, 50, and then we also had our first patch release for iRODS, 501. We've closed almost between 300 to 400 issues, which is quite a bit. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is the 4.3 series, and just mostly point out some highlights that have happened with the 4.3 series. So first up is 4.3.3. We dropped support for CentOS 7. We added support for Ubuntu 24, and some of these things are going to be talked about later on in the conference. Support for Postgres 15, which had a long-standing issue open in the iRODS repository that's been finally closed. We've been putting in effort to improve support for compilers and libstandard C++. We've also made an important change to our packaging. That we now include the version of the development package, which the plugins and the packages were built against, so you can always tell what version a particular package was built for. jQuery 2 also received some improvements. The first one in the sense that we now have better support for SQL functions. We'll talk more about that a little bit later. There's also support for multi-argument SQL functions. So now you can pass multiple arguments. You can nest functions within SQL calls as well. And then we've also had some improvement. We had a major improvement in the logging area, and that is we had a 10x improvement around timestamp generation. For 4.3.4, 4.3.4 was all about preparing the ground for iRODS 5, pretty much. We wanted to make sure that we deprecated functionality that we knew we weren't going to support moving forward. Such examples would be iLocate, some of the wildcard functionality, improved support for removal of iMeta interactive. That is something that we're going to continue to push forward. That is the removal of the interactive modes for various iCommands. We also removed microservices for monitoring various information within the various resources within the iRODS zone. Obviously, with new releases come more bug fixes and cleaner code implementations. One of the big announcements for 4.3.4 was the addition of iMISC server info, being able to report whether SSL and TLS was enabled in the server. Another thing that we did here was when you remove a user, any permissions that were set or associated with that user are now removed as well. And also we expanded the permission levels for the Atomic Apples API endpoint. It's weird. So 4.3 came out some years ago, 4.3.0, and it's funny that we're already at the point where we're talking about the end of life for the 4.3 series. But we've had 4 or 5 releases at this point, and so now we are pretty much preparing to end the 4.3 series with 4.3.5. So if there are any issues that you are encountering, please open issues, report them, and we will try to get those resolved for 4.3.5 before we start focusing all our efforts into iRODS 5. All right, so now we are off to iRODS 5 news. So the motivation behind iRODS 5 was mostly to, this is in support of us wanting to be more normal and boring. It represents a significant effort around us wanting to build an enterprise-grade data management platform. So this involved looking at other competitor products and seeing what things were offered there. How do we provide such features to our users? And so I think we've made a pretty good effort and with the initial release of iRODS 5 to achieve some of those goals, mostly in the areas of deployment and management within a variety of environments. So on this slide here, this is a list of notable mentions, basically things that I'm not going to go into great detail about. Some of these things will be covered in later talks, mostly in, I believe, Marcus's packaging update, which we'll hear from him about all the nice things he's done there. But just to highlight some things, we've limited the release of iRODS 5 to Ubuntu 22, 24, Debian 12, and Enterprise Linux 9. This is mostly to just ease the amount of work needed to release it. Because due to older OS, there are some challenges around things like OpenSSL. And so just by releasing for a limited number of OS or just more later OS versions, we get to dodge some of those challenges altogether. We've been putting a lot of effort around versioning. Plugins are now decoupled. They will no longer be released with every major release of the iRODS server. So plugins will now use semantic versioning, and you no longer have to worry about having to install a bunch of packages with every release of iRODS. All we have to do is recompile the plugin, and it will just work. Obviously, we migrated to OpenSSL 3. All the things that we deprecated in iRODS 3, we've removed. We have also removed the ability to disable strict ACLs. And so this one was we were a little unsure about this, but we raised the question and people didn't seem to have an issue with this happening, and so we moved forward with that. And last but not least, we also introduced some additional log categories to help with being able to determine what the database plugin, the SQL that's being executed by the database, as well as jQuery 1. You will now have more insight into what those particular components within the server do. I will say, before I'm going, that jQuery 1, just be very careful with the log category for jQuery 1. Because jQuery is used throughout the server, it produces a tremendous amount of log messages. So just be aware of that. All right, so now we're going to get into some more detailed updates for iRODS 5. The first one being that we revamped the startup and shutdown process. So with iRODS 4.3, the startup and shutdown process is pretty confusing and complex. And so one of the things that we wanted to do, we wanted to simplify that implementation and make it more deterministic. One of the ways in which we just completely rebuilt the entire startup process and the shutdown process so things are more normal and boring, and that this allowed us to have a proper implementations around signal handling. And so through that, we were able to change the server so that it does not auto reload configuration anymore. So now you can provision all of your updates at one time, and then you can send the SIG hub signal to trigger a reload. And if everything is happy and validated and good, then the server will just come up. If there are issues with your configuration, the server will report those. There's also options to actually check that your server config is correct as well. One additional feature here that we added was the ability to start servers out of order. So now you can launch in the provider. It will wait for the database to come alive. Same thing for the consumer. If the consumers will look for the provider before they actually complete their startup. So this means that you no longer have to be so cautious about how things are launched. This only applies to startup too. Another thing we did was we separated the upgrade logic from the starting of the server. For those who have been running iRODS for a long time, they will know that there are two steps with the upgrade process. There's the package upgrade, and then there's also the upgrade process for the catalog. So when you launch the server in 4.3, depending if there were changes to the catalog, the Python scripts that were involved in that process, they would check for the catalog schema changes and they would apply those if necessary. We've now separated those two things. Now there's a dedicated upgrade iRODS.py script, which encapsulates all of the logic around updating schemas and various things. The server binary itself is only focused on starting the server and running. It expects a working environment. It does perform catalog checks to make sure that, hey, is my schema at the right level? If it's not, it terminates. So that should make things a bit more deterministic for administrators who have to manage several iRODS servers. We've also added native support for the communication with the service manager. So iRODS 5 just works with systemd and various service managers out the box. We do provide scripts for working with systemd. These are template files which you can choose to use or not, up to you. And last but not least, we've also decided to remove the control plane. There were some pain points with dealing with the control plane, which made 4.3's control, I guess you could say, it just made the startup and the process model for iRODS 4 complicated. And so by removing the control plane, that means we lose the iRODS grid command, and it just simplifies things. Like, you don't necessarily need the control plane. It might come back in a later release in a different way, but that depends on what the community, reports to us. We've also removed the iRODS CTL script, which was a convenience wrapper around launching the iRODS server. But we do, if people feel that is important to have, we can always bring that back. So this is the removal of iRODS CTL is more of an experiment to see is this important to people. All right, so now about the unified server configuration. So as I mentioned, for those who have looked at the release notes for iRODS 5, they will know that all of the server config information is now located in server config. The server no longer depends on the service account's iRODS environment.json file. So if you want to make changes to your server, all you have to know about is server config.json, and then if there are zone-wide options, then you can check the catalog for that. So the mental model around configuration is simplified. The JSON snippets here are just examples of what you will see in the config file. For those who are relying for such options like SSL options, encryption, they now have dedicated blocks within server config. This is just to show you what those look like. All of this information is documented at docs.irods.org, and we provided links at the bottom of the slides where these things are highlighted so that you can go and actually look at these things. I think also I want to mention that for server config, that a reload of the server config via SIG hub also means that all of the options actually take effect. I believe there are 2 server config options which require a full restart of the server to take effect. One of the big things here for iRODS 5 that we introduced was support for access time tracking for all replicas. This is mostly us looking at what our competitors do and looking at various dashboards and what information is being tracked. And so one of the main things that stood out was access time. And so this is like the first step for us to go into the direction of managing, having better metrics for people's zones, because we know that this is important. So for access time within iRODS, all replicas maintain their own access time. It works similar to how Linux's relatime logic works. This is all updated in the background, so to avoid issues with performance. And I think there are 4 options for access time today, which you can manipulate. These are zone-wide options, so any change to these options will affect all your servers, and you will need to make sure that you restart your servers for these things to take effect. This is one such option where you do have to restart your server for the changes to take effect. Access time is also, the last thing I just want to mention about access time is that it only updates or queues an update when you open a replica for read. Okay, it's not for writes, it's only when you actually attempt to read information out of the replica. And there's a whole section within the documentation where you can go and read about all of this information. All right, so a big thing with iRODS 5 is that we adjusted the string parser for jQuery 1. Through the work that we learned for jQuery 2, we have some experience now writing Flex Bison parsers, so we took a moment and wanted to see what it was like wanted to see if we could fix all the issues with jQuery 1 by writing a tiny Flex Bison parser, and it turned out that we could. And so this parser is strictly for C and for basically C-based languages. We could make this available to other languages outside of C, but that is yet to be discussed, especially since we have jQuery 2. The main thing here with this change is that you now have the ability with jQuery 1 to escape embedded special characters, embedded single quotes, and so this resolves all the issues that have been reported for jQuery 1 over the years, mainly related to iQuest and things related to string-based parsing. Let's see. All right. So for jQuery 2, we have made our first major departure from jQuery 1 with the use of the distinct keyword. Those familiar with jQuery 1 know that jQuery 1, when it handles the placement of the distinct keyword for you. So if you ever look at the actual generated SQL, then you will notice that depending on what your query was, it will place the distinct keyword in various locations to make sure that you get the desired behavior. For jQuery 2, we decided to move away from that and grant control over this keyword to users. And the main reason for this is because it helps improve the ability to count things, and it also makes it very clear what you are counting, whether you're counting replicas or data objects or whatnot. And so at the very bottom here, we have some examples which demonstrate this using iQuery, right? So now, if we look at the first example, select collection name and data name, in jQuery 1, that would produce the list of data objects because it's going to inject the distinct keyword. For jQuery 2 and iRODS 5, this will now list replicas. So you now have to be more explicit about what it is that you want, just like in SQL. And so now you can, with the second example, we can list data objects by just including the distinct keyword. And in the third example, notice that our functions now allow you to also insert keywords into them as well. So we do select count and we place the distinct keyword inside the count parameter list, and that achieves the ability to count data objects. So things are more clear. Notice that we have in big bold letters that this change is not backwards compatible with 4.3.4 and earlier. This is strictly limited to jQuery 2 because this is a change in syntax and once we ship a version of iRODS, we can't go back and change that version. So this is just something to keep in mind as you move things over to jQuery 2. Another thing that we introduced was the ability to lock delay rules. We call it locking, but it's also like claiming too. So this feature was developed as a result of the redesign. What we wanted, we were looking at having to port the migration logic and what we could do to simplify that implementation. And this came out of that work. So what this does is it basically pins right before execution of a delay rule. The delay server will check to see, hey, is this rule claimed or locked? If it is not locked, then we immediately lock that rule by attaching a bit of information, such as the host name, the delay server's PID, as well as a timestamp indicating when that rule was locked. And this serves as a way, what this opens up is the ability for us to one day make it possible for there to be multiple delay servers run within the same zone. All right. All right. So now we are going to go into plugins and clients for iRODS. So with iRODS 5, we introduced two new rule engine plugin operations, setup and teardown. These were needed. These were introduced as a way for us to, rule engine plugins, they always auto reload, they auto load configuration and have the possibility to read configuration whenever a new agent is launched. And so to get around that issue, we introduced setup and teardown. These are operations which are mainly there to allow people writing plugins to either load static configuration, things that don't change or not meant to change over the lifetime of a running server, or they want to set up some external resources. So for people, for example, the audit plugin could lean on these setup and teardown operations to launch some proxy operation or some additional operation to help with AMQP connection handling, right? To improve that kind of situation. And so we're looking forward in the next releases of the audit plugin to make use of these operations so that we can improve that situation there. So setup is run during the agent factory startup process. And so these operations only run one time, and teardown is run during the agent factory shutdown process. All right. So now I'm going to talk about the storage sharing capability plugin. This plugin has received a significant number of improvements, especially in the area of stability. We resolved all of the issues or all of the primary issues related to a lack of user permissions. This was handled by making use of the local RODS admin account. We added the ability to run storage tiering with address sanitizer, or at least we made use of address sanitizer to help with tracking down memory leaks. And so we resolved a number of those issues. Issues related to packaging have been fixed. We've also expanded the number of PEPs that are supported by storage tiering. It lacked some support for PEPs such as touch, replica open, replica close. And we've migrated to using the iRODS 4.3 logger for things as well. So we think that the storage sharing plugin is going to prove to be significantly more stable for people and behave in the way that people expect. For the automated ingest capability, we had 2 releases since last year. 0.5.0 did introduce a breaking change in the API, but this was necessary. And so given that we haven't reached 1.0 status, it's great. We went ahead and decided to make that change as well. The implementation is now clearer and cleaner through a refactorization effort. We've added the ability to we've added support for rsync --delete like functionality. And we've also implemented support for parallel removal, which has resulted in a roughly 55% improvement compared to iRemove-F. And like with anything, we've improved our ability to report various statistics about individual jobs. All right, so for the Python rule engine plugin, during an effort to deal with, I think, newer version of Clang is what it was, newer compilers, we discovered that there were issues with thread management related to the Python interpreter. And so we spent some time and we've worked that out and got that fixed. In the process of doing that, we also removed all the Python 2 compatibility code. And we've also added support for jQuery 2 to the query module so that people who are writing policy in the Python rule engine plugin, they now have access to jQuery 2 as well. For PAM Interactive, so for those in the room who don't know what PAM Interactive is, this is an authentication plugin that came out of the Auth working group. This was developed with help from the community. And the initial implementation was written by SURF and ownership was passed over to the iRODS Consortium, where we added tests, wanted to make sure that everything was working as expected, documentation. And through this plugin, organizations can now implement dynamic authentication flows that meet their needs. We've had 3 releases since UGM 2024. So the initial, nothing's changed drastically for this plugin. Mainly we fixed an issue with RPM packaging, and then we also made it compatible with iRODS 5. All right, so now I'm going to have Justin come up, and he's going to talk about the S3 resource plugin and some of the things that he's working on here.
Okay, on the S3 resource plugin, we had a few bug fixes. One was improved handling in number of threads and handling of shared memory. We fixed the crash due to mishandling of standard string objects, which were being zeroed out. The memory was being zeroed out for the standard string, and sometimes it would cause crashes, sometimes not. Mainly in iRODS 5, we had a problem, but we made sure that was fixed in 4 as well. Introduced the checksum read buffer size in bytes configuration property. It allows administrators to adjust the buffer size used for calculating checksums. We were getting the default buffer size was very small, and that meant that checksum calculations took a long time. So we allowed the administrator to adjust the size of that buffer. Cleaned up the implementation and migrated to distribution provided packages. Okay, Globus connector. Some minor bug fixes. Fixed handling of file names containing apostrophe. Simple bug fix. The other changes were around the testing framework. So we built last year a kind of a testing framework for Globus. Prior to that, pretty much all the testing was manual. I had mentioned in last year's UGM that we had built that framework. We just expanded it this year some. We added support for testing against unreleased versions of iRODS. It requires a little bit of manual update of a couple files, but you can now use that testing framework to test unreleased versions of iRODS. And added support for additional operating systems. When we initially released it, we only supported a couple different operating systems, but we added Ubuntu 22, 24, Deb 11, 12, and EL8 and 9. So now all the operating systems we support can be automatically tested. Okay, iRODS S3 API. This is the presenting iRODS as an S3. We did some additional work on that. The main change was improvements around multi-part uploads. Previously, if someone did a multi-part upload, we would write part sizes to part files on the server that has the S3 API running. And then when they called complete multiple part upload, all those part files would be flushed to S3 and written directly to would be flushed to iRODS and written directly to iRODS. And the reason we did that was because we didn't know necessarily what the part offset or what the file offset is for each part ahead of time. So we had to write part files. Now, depending on the order of the part files coming in, if we can determine what the offset of the file is at the time that they initiate that part, we will stream it directly to iRODS. And so only the parts where we don't know the offset will we write part files and stream that later. We did some testing on that, and that improved performance by about 40% on multi-part uploads. And we, in addition, added support for abort multi-part uploads. Okay.
All right, thank you, Justin. So, so as you can see, we've put a lot of great effort into trying to make iRODS 5 more normal and boring. A lot of work went into the server. We are listening to the community and working hard to deliver functionality that supports people's use cases and to make iRODS a real enterprise level data management platform that meets people's needs. But, the work is never done. And so, we look forward to hearing from the community. Please get involved, join working groups, open up issues, report bugs, join the conversation. And for those for the members, tell others, publish, cite, do all the things, tell people about your iRODS usage. And with that wraps up the technology update. Here is a list of upcoming talks for the rest of the conference. And I think we can go into questions. Thank you. All right, so the first question is, this is from Christopher, and it says, from my experience, systemd doesn't work well within containers. Are there alternatives that will allow us to manage the iRODS process inside of a container? Does iRODS have any plans around containerization for deployments? So you do not have to use systemd for iRODS 5. iRODS 5 can be process 1. So you can launch the container with iRODS sitting at the front, and iRODS will work just fine, just like any normal application, because the signal handling for iRODS 5 has been reworked from the ground up to support this use case. And so we've actually been talking about building images that demonstrate this. The things that we build might not be published to Docker Hub or anywhere, but we do want to spend some time and investigate and make sure that we demonstrate that this does work, and that should happen at some point. Let's see, does that answer the question, Christopher? I guess I'll go on to the next question. Let's see, the next question is from John Constable, and the question is, can I explain the change to strict ACLs, please?
So I answered that one in text.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. The next question is, what is the expected behavior if you upgrade and don't run the upgrade script on a package misconfiguration or in the middle of its own upgrade? So depending on if there's a catalog upgrade that we have to perform and you attempt to launch the server without running the upgrade script, the iRODS server will detect that there's a difference in the schema version and it will not launch. It will instruct you to run the upgrade script. And so there are safeguards in place to guard against things that we can detect. The next question is from John also. It is, any sample example deployments? We do not currently have any example deployments of, I'm going to say, containerized iRODS, but I have been running iRODS 5 for months on my workstation. Not sure if that answers your question.
We will update iRODS demo if it hasn't already been
Yes,
updated.
yes.
I don't
So
know that that's ready for production, like it's a demo. So there may not be best practices in there for grown-ups.
right. Let's see. Another question is, upgrade notes don't make it clear that an admin needs to move all the settings from iRODS environment.json into server config.json. Could we get some more documents on first-time installs and upgrading, please, for those coming to this new? That is a good point. I think that is something that we just failed to remember to do, and we will update the documentation to detail that information. Right now, that is all handled for you, so there is logic in upgrade iRODS.py, which will, if you define things such as encryption values, such as SSL TLS settings, then all those things will be ported to the correct properties within serverconfig.json. So for the most part, it's not something that you have to worry about. But I agree that having documentation stating this would be helpful. So we'll look into that. Last question from John is, are there any plans to handle multiple version compatibility within the zone, so much needed for large deployment upgrades? So I'm assuming this question is about having mixed versions of iRODS 5 within a zone. I don't really have a comment on that right now. I think right now best practice is to continue to keep all of your servers at the same version level. It's just going to reduce chances of issues, and we're happy to have a conversation about what it would look like in the future to allow multiple versions of iRODS running within the same zone. But for now, we are just not there yet. All right. Do we have any more questions?
I remember that you might plan to include HTTP REST API directly into iRODS, hence being able to use this way to talk directly to the server rather than using a proxy as it is now. Is this still in the future plans?
So the question was, are we still planning to include the HTTP API server into the iRODS server? And the answer is that is still planned, and we hope to have that in an upcoming release, but it will require, we have to do some work around what does that look like. It's not clear to us how to do that just yet. There's still some details to work out, but that is planned.
Okay, and the other question John had earlier was, you mentioned some incompatibilities with older versions of iRODS. Is there anything that you didn't mention that they would have to know about?
So the question is, is there anything else to know about as far as running mismatch iRODS versions within the same zone? Nothing comes to mind right now. If something does come up, I'm happy to relay that information to John or anyone else who's interested.
Too far. All right, we're gonna read it from over here. Mustafa says, while jQuery 2 parser itself has been integrated, adoption by various clients will come gradually because we're not necessarily doing it at the same time. What's the current status of client adoption for jQuery 2? And then what's the timeline for that? Repeat that. Can you repeat it?
So the question is, what does adoption for jQuery 2 look like for clients? I am unsure about how to even answer that question right now. jQuery 2 is available. Obviously, we want to expand use as much as possible, but just like with the change with distinct, jQuery 2 is still considered an experimental parser, even though we know it works. We want people to use it more so that we can find the bugs, but we definitely don't want to make it the default yet until we've hammered out all the issues and that there's more, use out there in the wild. So until we hear from more community members about their experiences with jQuery 2, let's just say we're looking at possibly a few years before jQuery 2 is, in heavy usage and available everywhere to clients. All right. Well, I think that wraps up my talk.